Good morning, everyone.
Good morning.
Good morning. My name is Ebony Singletary, and you are at the Rebuild workshop entitled Sacred Spaces of the Black Church, the Communal Witness of the Black Church. That is a mouthful. This workshop will be co-presented by Dr. Dara Delgado and Reverend Darrell Antonio Blue. Dr. Dara Delgado is an assistant professor of religious studies and Christianity at Allegheny College, an AAUW 2018-2019 American Dissertation Fellow, and an adjunct professor here at Northeastern Seminary. Dara's research interests include the history and theology of American Pentecostalism, as well as the role of race, gender, and popular culture in American Christianity during the modern era, all of which came together in a dissertation entitled Life, Liberty, and the Practicality of Holiness, a social historical examination of the life and work of Ida Bell Robinson. At the University of Dayton, Dara taught traditional undergraduate students in the Department of Religious Studies. When Dara is not acting in the role of teacher-scholar, Dara enjoys the company of friends and family, volunteering at her local church, and attending concerts and shows. Reverend Darrell Antonio Blue is a native of Broadway, North Carolina. He received his undergraduate education from North Carolina Agricultural and Technical State University in Greensboro, North Carolina, and organization leadership from the University of Memphis in Memphis, Tennessee. He obtained his Master of Divinity from St. Paul's School of Theology in Oklahoma City, Oklahoma, and he is in the final year of completing his doctoral studies at Boston University, pursuing his Doctor of Ministry in Transformational Leadership.
Say good morning to everyone. Good morning. And we are going to begin. We're going to ask Dr. Delgado to begin, and she's going to give us the historical perspective of our workshop, and then I'll come back, and then I'll talk about the practical. All right? All right.
Good morning, everyone. Thank you so much for being with us today. If anything could go wrong, it will go wrong, and the internet is fighting me, so I am going to rely wholly on my expertise in this area. Can someone do me the favor? Read me the title of this workshop.
Sacred Spaces of the Black Church. No.
Yeah, no, definitely cheating. Go ahead. Say it for me one more time, Deborah.
Sacred Spaces of the Black Church, the communal witness of the Black Church.
How many times is Black Church in there? I just need one person, one. What is the Black Church? There's no right or wrong. I'm not grading, I promise.
Not the white church?
That works.
The Black church is a construct associated with domination and the result of Black people coming together and finding sacred spaces.
A construct. Does the Black church remain? I'm seeing nods. Why does it remain? Talk to me.
Well, I still belong to the Black church.
What does that look like for you?
It looks like a church that is involved in not only the sacred, but in the community and the total well-being of the members.
Yeah. Y'all are in my presentation today. I like it. I like it. Your name? Michael. Michael told us it's a construct, and it is an institution developed as an act or resistance against dominant structures of power. The Black church, though, is a well-worn shorthand for the pluralism of Black Christianity. It is an umbrella term. It encompasses everybody that might be identified as a Black Christian. This is problematic because what ends up happening, as Michael has told us, is you kind of lose the resistance because you can be Black and Christian and not participate in the Black church.
Right.
Black church was meant to replace the old nomenclature, the Negro church. We didn't like that language, so we changed it to black church. So we got rid of the boys in his Negro church, and we leaned into something that was much more in line with contemporary conversation. Well, here's the thing about this construct. I'm going to keep stealing your term, Michael. Thank you very much. Someone like C. Eric Lincoln and Lawrence M. Mamaya took issue with the term the black church. Because while it talks about black-controlled denominations that were founded after the Free African Society in 1787, and it constituted what black Christians were trying to do as acts of resistance and community engagement, and as well as the spirituality of black people, what we have seen happen over time is that it's loaded with assumptions. Do black churches shout? Do black churches dance? Do all black churches have gospel music? Do we include Catholics in the black church? Are they just Protestants? It gets a little hairy. Well, it worked when we got to the civil rights era, because everybody likes the black church in that era. It looks like it's really involved and it's communally engaged. But scholars like Eddie Laud come along in 2010 and they say, the black church is dead. That's a direct quote. Black church, capital B, capital C, black church, the black church, as you see in the title of this presentation. The black church is dead. He argues, and this is a quote, the black church as we've known it or imagined it is dead. Of course, many African Americans still go to church, so we're not eliminating black Christians, but the idea of this venerable institution as central to black life and the repository of social and moral conscience of a nation has disappeared. The arm has fallen weak. There's another scholar by the name of Byron Williams. He says, I agree with Eddie. It is dead, but not for the reasons he says. Listen to what Byron Williams has to say. Quote, the myth of the black church being the storehouse of the nation's moral compass was created largely during the civil rights movement of the 1950s and 60s. The black church is therefore looked upon as standing at the vanguard of progressive and moral issues. He goes on to say, or he takes umbrage with this mythologized, right, form of the institution as a repository of social and moral conscience, because you can be a black church with black people and not be involved in your community. Right. I'm preaching? Oh, okay. Right. Let me get myself together.
Reverend, do you have the collection?
I mean, there's always a collection plate, right? Why is this important? Because in this session that we're in that's entitled Around the Black Church, we need to take a moment and pause, because we don't want to get caught up in the nostalgia and the myth of what the black church is, because that can blind us to the extensive history of black faith and thought in this country and the connectivity that black people have had to themselves, to their community, and to the church, lowercase c. In fact, in some ways, it doesn't allow black people to spread their wings and define Christianity for themselves when we constrict them to a 1950s, 1960s civil rights form of black church. So, the history of black Christianity, we all know this, in America, or the United States, is riddled with problems. The first 100 years, it was filled with misinterpretations of scripture, white supremacist theology, and Christian imperialism. One more time. It was filled with misinterpretation of scripture, white supremacist theology, and Christian imperialism. And this includes, but is not limited to, withholding Christianity from enslaved Africans for upwards to 100 years until it served them well. We need docile slaves. Oh, you're quoting Delgado. This is all Delgado. Right? So when we needed it as a means of subjugation, then we gave enslaved Africans Christianity. There's a thing, though, about a resilient, resistant people. You can give me $1, I'm gonna turn it into 100. You can give me the scraps, I'm gonna turn it into soul food. And so when black people said, all right, We will take your Christianity and we will pair it with our experience. They began to construct a black Christianity or a black religious experience in the United States that, yes, it included, right, the misinterpretation of scripture, white supremacist theology, Christian imperialism, but they began to fashion it in a way that worked for them. This is what we call the black prophetic tradition. The black prophetic tradition is rooted in the idea around what Michael told us of resistance. It is this idea of black folks claiming this country as their own. You brought us here, it's ours. Okay, we built this, so we might as well. There's also this sense that the country does, in fact, I know this is a bad word, so plug your ears if you're gonna get all hyped up. There is this notion of reparation. There's a sense of, because we've been here, there should be some participation of our future generations and legacies actually engaging in the peace and the prosperity of this country. Kind of deserve it. This is built into the black religious experience, whether it's stated or not. The other thing is this. You all like to talk about Imago Dei. Guess who's also created in the image and likeness of God? We look like God, sound like God.
My Lord.
I'm not giving you all the points, but I need you to understand that the black prophetic tradition that began around the time of chattel slavery was the thing that was rooting and grounding the black Christian experience in the United States. And because it was never rooted in rugged individualism. They didn't like that part. Y'all can have that. And because it wasn't just about fulfilling one's personal needs of the spirit, but it was always about one's brother or sister. That communal aspect was inherent to it. That God is not just concerned about my salvation, but he's concerned about everyone. He's concerned about everyone's deliverance, everyone's liberation. So salvation isn't individuated, it is social. How much time do I have? No, because my colleague here needs to speak.
You still have.
So this, along with the standing history of communal identity carried over in the fragile memory from their African past, scaffolded a black Christianity that prioritized not only community, but radical inclusivity, participation by each member of the community, and that included men, women, children. Y'all are church people in here, yeah?
Yeah.
How many children are involved in the politics and the life of the church decision making? Oh, I see your eyebrow. So okay, cool. You might want to engage your babies. Because guess what? Post-Reconstruction, post-emancipation, that was actually the norm in black churches. That children didn't just sit in on the business meetings, they actually had a right to vote. There is a scholar by the name of Elsa Barkley Brown. She wrote a paper. Can one of my students tell you all what the paper is? Lindsay, do you have it at hand anywhere?
I don't have it. I can find it.
If so, no, find it if you can, because I want the people to have it. It is a thick description of a church in Richmond, Virginia. James, if you find it, please let the people know. Oh, I see it right there. What is the title? Negotiating. James is ready, and his paper copy, that's my guy. Negotiating and transforming the public sphere. Negotiating and transforming the public sphere, African American political life, African American political life, in the transition from slavery to freedom. Elsa Barkley Brown. In there, she does this case study where she looks at this particular church from Richmond, Virginia, immediately following emancipation and in the thick of Reconstruction, and she looks at the ways in which this community not only gathered together to support one another, but they were all fully present and engaged. It was radical inclusivity, radical accessibility. There was a way in which everyone wasn't just claiming to be made in the image and likeness of God. I'm actually respecting your human dignity by allowing you to have a voice and to be seen. And so when my colleague gets up here and talks about how black church has functioned in the contemporary era, particularly post-pandemic, I want us to continue to problematize that safe umbrella of Black church and start thinking more radically about talking about Black Christianity as a prophetic tradition. A prophetic tradition that is rooted in community well-being. Because that's really what it's all about. Spirituality becomes null and void if the people are hungry.
Yes.
Right.
Yes.
If the children are ignorant.
Yes.
If folks are dying. You gotta have the things together. You have to have the meat with the potatoes. Otherwise, it's a lot of carbs.
Or if you have a controlling party that's bigots and hypocritical.
Here we go. Michael, we need to talk afterwards. It's a good time. Here's the thing, though. I'm gonna close on this point real fast. What Barclay Brown gets to at the end of that, while she's painting this wonderful picture of how folks were radically included in this community, articulating the best of Christianity and the best of Black personhood, she notes that by the end of a certain period, assimilation into the dominant culture and its patriarchalism, paired with that rugged individualism, threatened an extant way of being that also jeopardized the Black Christian witness. In a moment of history when dignity of the whole person was not a universal privilege. That's a complex statement to say this. When Black folks wanted respectability and they wanted to assimilate into the larger culture, guess what happened? The men said, women, we got this. And the children had to sit and be quiet. And now what happens? The very thing that they were fighting against, resisting, became a norm. And so what you call the Black church is actually an assimilated church. I'm calling for a prophetic church. Yeah? Tell us how y'all prophesy.
All right, to bridge the gap with what Dr. Delgado was just sharing, I want to begin with a question. I want you to jot this down. I want you to answer it. Question to consider. How would you describe your congregation's understanding of its own story?
Read that again, please.
How would you describe your congregation's understanding of its own story? Dr. Delgado was trying to help us. In order for us to really move forward to that, become that prophetic church, you have to know who you were, who you are, and where you're trying to go. So can someone answer that question for me? Reverend Bell, you're looking off like you want to, like you want to answer. Anyone wants to describe your own context?
Are you asking for like your local church?
Your local church,
Or, like, your denomination?
your local church, your context.
Uninformed.
Hmm.
In a word, yeah.
Okay.
We don't know much about our history.
Okay. Uninformed. Don't know much about history. Anyone else?
We know a lot about our history and want to maintain that history over progress.
That's good. So did y'all hear what she said? Okay. Can you speak louder? I want you to in your own voice.
So we know a lot about our church history and would rather maintain that than move towards progress.
Yes.
We know a lot about our history because we're first generation, but we are aggressively pursuing the next chapter because the first generation can easily be seen transitioning. So I think we know who we are, where we came from, but our biggest challenge is what will become and what will that look like.
Right. Right. Okay.
That's my pastor, y'all.
Go fast. Anyone else? Yes, James.
So our congregation is kind of split because we have the people that literally grew up in our church and they have that long history in our congregation. And then we have people like me. I've been in this church less than roughly a year. So my understanding of our individual church, and even our denomination, because I switched denominations, it's not complete because they're so new, and so we kind of have that dual understanding within our congregation.
Okay. Anyone else? Yes, Reverend Bill.
I think Dr. Delgado described it very well about forged in resistance. And I would say that our church in the downtown Buffalo area, first of our churches, was put there because it was forged by the fires of segregation and everything that goes with it, to make for a people, a community. So that's where I began the narrative.
Okay. Thank you all for sharing. I just want to build on what you said because it stuck with me. When I think about my personal context, I pastor Memorial African Methodist Episcopal Zion Church. So it's the oldest black church in Rochester. So to give you a little context about Memorial, founded 1827 by a gentleman named Thomas James. Slave, ran away, came here. What's interesting is he joined another, what they called at that time, Zion Methodist Church, 1823. That church failed to exist because of infighting. It closed by 1830. Memorial was started. And he founded it on three major pillars. So to give you a little context. So justice, or social justice as we deal with now, scriptural holiness, and educational excellence. Those are our pillars. What's interesting is it was a stop on the Underground Railroad. Many people know that Frederick Douglass was a member of our church. He started his North Star newspaper in the basement. But most people do not know this one fact. We were the AME Zion Church of Rochester until 1907. We added the name Memorial to memorialize the stained glass windows. Frederick Douglass, Harriet Tubman, Susan B. Anthony, that's what I'm trying to think of. Thank you, she's my member. That's what, thank you. And I said to our congregation, now I'm back to your point, when I first got here, because I love history, but I noticed something as I walked through our church. Everything reminded me of the past. I was going through, this person did this person did that, and I said to myself, well, what are we doing now? Wow. So Sister Brenda can tell you, I strategically, after the first year, because I'm a veteran pastor, I pastored 6 churches, this is my 6th one. After a year, I strategically took down all of it. Wow. Every bit of it. Because here was the question I challenged my church. Do we want to be simply what our name is, a memorial? Or do we want to be a movement?
Yes.
Because part of the reason, and going back to your point, is sometimes we are part of something, but we're not well informed about where we need to be and who we need to be for our community. So here's some of the things that we have practically put in place. First thing is, we want to deal with digital discipleship, and you see this in our overview. We had to begin to think about some things, because I want you to think about this. Language is so important. Think about this concept of when Jesus says that he wants us to be followers. Okay? That term is heard differently now in today's context. Because when you think about social media, everyone has followers, but it doesn't involve relationship. I can follow you and not know you because it's a trend. So how do we begin to build language so that when people come into the 4 walls, we actually are talking their language? Because when someone that's not really familiar with church hear follower, Are they really connecting the same way that we think they should be connecting? No. So oftentimes we don't even think about what it is or how we communicate properly with each group. So if we're going to disciple, we have to begin to think about, how do I talk to you? How do I properly communicate so that you better understand? One of the things that we had to do with pandemic, and I think everyone can say this, pandemic caused all of us to just shift, pause, take a step back and say, what are we doing? And how do we continue to be the church? So one of the things we had to do, because we all moved virtually, we had to first begin with some training with our class leaders. So in the Methodist Church, we have class leaders. Some may have cell group leaders, different term. But we intentionally, I met with our leader of leaders who was over our class leader and said, listen, we have to do some training because we have some seniors who for years have said technology is of the devil, right? And how do we help them to prepare for where we are? Because now we can't go to that sacred space. That space that, especially in the black church, the building is the church.
Right.
So how do we create a sacred space now virtually? That now we can't go in the four walls, but we still need to be the church. So we had to intentionally do some training with our class leaders to say, hey, for them to log on, just teach them simple steps of how to call in to Zoom so that people know what they need to do. So one of the things I want to kind of pause and step back and ask you all. So at the beginning of the pandemic, how do you feel like your church acclimated to the pandemic? Was it a smooth transition? Do you feel like you prepared your people? Did you train your people? Or did you just kind of just go with the flow? Go with the flow. Thank you for the honesty. Yes.
We had to get a technology team pretty fast put together. Because we were not live streaming before the pandemic. Now live streaming is there to stay. I like it when I'm sick. I watch it from home. When I travel, I can. But we had to get some of our young techie people on board and there was some trial and errors First they recorded it from their homes, and then we went to the church building and pre-recorded on Saturday, and then it was recorded showing on Sunday. But it took about 8 months, 6 months, because we were conservative and did not reopen for a whole year.
Well, we was out longer than that. I said we were out longer than that, so you're doing good if you got him back in the year. Okay.
Churches were back in about a lot sooner, about 6 months.
6 months? Okay. Wow. Yes.
In my observation, what I saw that churches were struggling from 17 to 47, like the historically black churches. There was this divide. There were no one there. So I was one who was recruited at the time. I grew up in a Pentecostal church here, but I was in Princeton at the time, and I was recruited to be a social media ambassador from a historical church, Witherspoon Street Presbyterian Church. So it gave me an opportunity to go, and I would go to our seasoned members, and I would show them how to use Zoom and LinkedIn, because the brick and mortar was the church.
Right.
And so for fear of the church dying out, that's what I've seen now. My father now is 89 years old, and in the church he has here, they sent him to Arizona. They're still doing church planting. They're still lost in that. And so from that 17 to 47, I see that there is a loss in our black churches. And if we don't understand what that looks like, and we don't get, that we're going to be lost, because there is a digital divide here.
Right.
That's where racism is taking place. Technology.
So did you hear that term she used? She classified herself as an ambassador. So this is the whole point of, we have to, that's another form of discipleship. Going out to make sure you have someone that is bridging the gap, reaching those that we would not normally reach. And all of our churches are struggling with that. That gap, that age group, most of them are lost, yes.
One of the things that I like, and I'm biased because I come out of Memorial. But one of the things I like about what you just shared with regard to seeing the church not as a history depository, but as a movement, and then you crafted out 3 movements. I can say to you that one of the things that was significant about Thomas James in terms of moving the church forward was the fact that, how many Rochesterians do we have here? Just raise your hand. So you all know where Genesee Valley Park is, don't you?
Yep.
Thomas James took the justice side of that 3-tier pillar, and he brought people into Corinthian Hall, let's just call it downtown. And he argued on the basis that black men were being shot, like we would peel off cans or bottles on tree stumps in Genesee Valley Park. Now imagine, and he called that in October of, I don't remember the year, but he called that Men Arms. And so we were trying to find a way to get them to stop this genocidal tendency toward black men, in particular, and perhaps destroying black families. So now they're involved with more than just the anchorage of a depository of history, but they're changing, they're being confrontational and resistance-oriented enough that when a Frederick Douglass gets there, he can pen a letter about why he will not join them on the 4th of July.
Good segue. Let's move into my next point. The civic and social engagement. So part of it was when I began to look at the history of Memorial, and to your point, Reverend Bell, from the onset, Thomas James established anti-slavery societies to make sure, and he quotes in his book, that he wanted to ensure that the black man was seen in the eyes of the law as equal. And he says that I formed this church not just for the spiritual side, but I want to bring awareness and to inform these members that they have rights just like everybody else. Now, as pastor of this church, I came in with that same mentality, saying, I owe a debt to everyone who's come before me to make sure that I not just preach prophetically to the congregation, but I prepare the members to better understand that there is a communal obligation that we have as members to meet the needs of everyone God puts us into contact with. So one of the things that we did when I first got there, we established a 501c3 nonprofit called Beyond the Sanctuary. The name is intentional. Because as I said earlier, most of us think in our mind that the church, the physical building, is the church. And we had to kind of break that down and say, no, you are the church. We are the church. So what we begin to do is, as we started the ministry, we had to begin to hear the needs from the people. So we began to survey our community. How can we serve you? What is it that you need from us? Because oftentimes the way what we do is we approach with this assumption, I already know what you need.
Right.
Let me fix it. And what we try to fix is not really what they need. Right. So they begin to point out to us how we could better serve. We started with just a food pantry and a clothes closet. That was it. Now, we move from those two to a Drive to Success program. We found out that there were people in the community who had fines up to here, who could not get their driver's license to go get a job or even drive. So what we did, created that program. We paid their fines, prepared them for drive training, take them to the test to make sure that they actually go. And we have a success rate of people who now are able to go get jobs, because now they can drive to go get the job. We partnered with dealerships to help them move forward in purchasing cars. It's not just one step, but we have to intentionally help people along the way. So that's one program. Then we found out that there are jobs available, but the people did not either have the resources or they didn't have the necessary training. If you all live here in Rochester, you know the construction is a big thing here. They building all the time. And one of the things that we noted is that there was not enough of the minority represented in construction. Now there are apartments, buildings going up every day. But I kept saying, now that's an issue. Here it is that I can help address. So what we did was we partnered with a construction company. We pay for the training, no out-of-pocket expense, send them to school, and they learn to build a house from the ground up. Graduate. Once they graduate, we have community partners. They have a job when they graduate. So now we are intentionally putting people in the right places. This is how you address the issues.
Wow.
We can't sit back and just say, oh, that's a problem. Right, pray about it.
Thoughts and prayers.
We're with you. But it's praying and action. Once we recognize the issue, we have to address it. Not only with construction, but we also partner with nursing. Nursing, we see that's a big industry here. Same thing we do with construction, we do with nursing. We partnered with MCC and some other organizations. We pay for all of that. And y'all saying, how y'all paying for all this stuff? Grants.
Yeah.
There's money available.
Yeah.
You have to take the time to go apply for it. But here's the thing, and this is what I had to explain to the group, because this is not my first nonprofit that I work with. Most agencies, or the government especially, wants to see that what you're going to do actually works. So I had to say to them, before we even go apply, let's just do it.
That's right.
So that when I approach them, I have the evidence, I have data to say, here, this is what we've been doing, and this is how it works. And so, as we think about the black church, this construct, I begin to think about Memorial, the history. That's who we are. When I looked at the history, we have a church that is a trend-setting church. First black doctor, first female black doctor, first person to integrate the School of Dentistry, first Supreme Court Justice out of Memorial in New York. And I can go on. And I kept saying, there's no way in the world I'm going to pastor this great church with this great history and just sit on it. Because it was a challenge for me to say, you know, what can I do to live into who we already are? And that's why I asked you the question to begin, because when you understand who you are and where you come from, then you can begin to live into, because here's what we have to better understand. We are a part of a larger fabric. It's God's church. So how do you do what you need to do in the corner or in the place that you are? You don't have to save the whole city, but you can save your neighborhood. There's something you can be doing intentionally to help to build up your specific area, okay? So the next thing is, I'm gonna finish with this here. We dealt with digital discipleship, civic engagement. The other thing, civic engagement. We intentionally have a minister on staff, Reverend Damon Wilson, who is our minister of leadership and social justice. I was asked to serve on the race commission, but I said, nope. I have someone within my congregation I want to serve in my place. Lesson here. Leaders, you can't do it all.
Amen. Amen.
Delegate.
Amen.
Because now it's a shared vision. It's not just the pastor who's in it or immersed in it. It is the congregation who you have strategically placed in positions to help to make sure that that you are socially engaged and that you're civically engaged. So how are we intentionally preparing and placing the leaders in the places or positions so that way we can see change and progress? Last, church growth and development. So just recently, Sister Brenda can say this, we just had a church retreat. I like to call it a come to Jesus meeting. And we had to take introspection to look at the areas that we're doing well in, areas that we need to grow in, and areas that we're not doing anything in. And we had to begin to say, okay, we recognize that these areas we're doing well in, but how can we do better? These areas we need to improve in, how do we improve? So we brought in someone to facilitate, and we begin to put in action steps. What can we put in for this month to begin to see change? What can we do within the next 3 months? And then what can we do by the end of the year? So that way we are intentional about church growth and development. And that's one thing I do believe as I think about growing up in the black church. It was not my formal education or going to college that prepared me to speak. It was getting ready to do an Easter speech.
Yes.
The black church was the central hub. It was the place that prepared you for life. Beyond just spirituality, it was, no, I'm helping to shape you to be the man or the woman that you need to be. And so oftentimes, I think someone said this earlier, we have gotten away from that because one of the strengths of the black church at one time was the family. That was the core piece. And I'm not just talking about your blood relatives, because anyone in my local church could tell me, Darrell, you need to get your attitude together. And I was not offended, because I knew that my church family was my family. They cared enough about me to tell me or correct me. We live in a society nowadays, nobody can say anything to anybody. Well, let me add this first. First of all, we need to say it with love.
Well,
but our motives have to be pure. They have to be right. And oftentimes we don't see that. So part of it is when we think about church leadership, we had leaders that invested in us. And I was sharing with one of our preachers. She asked me a question because she was preaching Sunday in my place. And she said, Pastor, as a young preacher who started at 19, what were the challenges starting so young? And how did you become prepared, and who helped prepare you? My pastor, before I even knew I was called, he brought me alongside him and mentored me. The black church was the space that they began to develop your gifts. They saw in you what you didn't see in yourself. They began to nurture and help you to become who they knew God had called you to be. And so I tell people, I'm not what I am because of me. It's because someone saw something in me that I didn't recognize at the time, but they begin to help me to grow, to be nurtured, and to see what God had called me to do. Okay? Want to stop for questions? Okay, all right, that's what I thought. All right, so we stopping. So now we're gonna have some Q&A, some questions, and we'll go from there.
I have a question.
Yes.
First of all, the white church can learn a whole lot from y'all, and we need to shut up and listen sometimes. But the studies show us that, especially the United States, is going to become more multi-ethnic as time goes on. As someone with
Oh, they said they can't hear you. Can you say, yep.
Right.
You want the mic?
I can yell. I can
Okay,
yell.
yeah, talk. Use your preacher voice.
As someone with multi-ethnic children, how can I share with them this rich history of the blood? Like, how do I marry that with the history, sometimes the very poor history of the white church? How can you merge those two to create this way more beautiful picture of God's church as a whole?
I think that is it's twofold for me. I know what we have begun to do at Memorial is we have intentionally, and Sister Brenda can testify to this, we intentionally have partnered with our United Methodist Church here to do more blended services, gatherings, teachings, so that way we can help people to become immersed, learn from one another, and better understand the history. You can intentionally, I guess, take your child to different places to learn that, but I think also, as I was saying, I think leadership needs to do that too. It needs to be more put in place so that way we can begin to shape the narrative and help people to better understand this is our history. These are the rich traditions and rich things that we would want to share with others. So for me, it's twofold. You want to?
My thing is using this language can be lowercase e. The Black church is not institutional; it's communal, right? So it's it is the blending of churches across cities, but we know how that works. We did a 2-hour service, some good gospel speaking, a talk, and then we've done things together. Yes. What I think I hear is the need to continue to build relationship around folks who are part of some of these communities, right? And the reason why I say it's not institutional, it's communal, because there's a relational dynamic. There are just ways of speaking and being and doing that just come from, I have a lot of old Southern sayings. I was born and raised in upstate New York. But why do I have these things? Because the old church mother that adopted my mother as her goddaughter was from Mississippi. And I spent a whole lot of time in her house because my mama was a single parent who was a nurse and had to work crazy hours, 3 to 11. So I was with this old woman from Mississippi by way of Chicago who was a church lady. And so I just learned to say things like, Lord have mercy. Right? Something happens, I'm like, Jesus, right? And so I'm 5, and I'm just like, what? But I also remember hearing her pray. I also remember that I wasn't the only kid in her house. There were a bunch of kids from the neighborhood that she just take care of. I also remember that we had to be hurried up because she didn't drive. So her husband, who I call my grandfather, would get us all in his Cadillac on a weird old night so that she could participate in choir rehearsal. It was the immersion in a relational life that brought about a communal life that gave me kind of an embodied sense of what that spirituality was. So yes, we can do partnerships, and I think those are super important for ecumenical reasons. But I think what you're asking for is something after relationship that starts to build into your kids a disposition, right? So that they can move in places and spaces in various ways, right? And I'm saying this as someone who's raising we call her a Blacktina, okay? Her mom's black, her daddy's not, right? And so he has no framework really for the black church, but when she's in black church, well, she can do black church. Why? Because people, not necessarily the institution, right? It's imitation. Kids imitate. And I think that there's something beautiful about that. So that would be my encouragement. Just throw them in a sea full of Southern black folk.
Right.
Yes. Yes.
So I have a question. How do you keep this tradition of the Black faith experience that is so near and dear to, I think, most of us who have grown up in Black faith? How do you keep that tradition, but then also find a way to make space for that 17 to 47 who are losing, who are missing out on this new space of faith that we need to move into, who are parenting children who have identity questions, who are parenting children who are going to school where there is gun violence, like all of these things. How do we keep this tradition, but then also move into this space that we honor progress to?
I feel like tradition is a bad word. This is a bad rap, excuse me. Tradition isn't bad. My macaroni and cheese is banging because of tradition.
Right.
See what I'm saying?
Right.
So there's a way in which we can be traditioned into something, but we don't have to be beholden to everything.
Right.
Now, my macaroni and cheese is banging, but it's not when my grandmother made it, because we're using different cheeses, but it's still got the same flavor. You see what? And I think that that's what we forget. When we hear tradition, we all recoil, like, oh, that's tradition. Right? But I think that there is a way in which we can hand down the spirit of something and even the tactile elements of something without being beholden. It has to be done this way in this space at this time.
Right.
No. If we have to, we will move it into digital space, but we will still figure out how to retain the old and the new.
Right.
I can listen to James Cleveland and Maverick City.
Right.
And I can be equipped to work in spaces that are racially and ethnically different. And I think that is the beauty of this generation, that they can do a multiplicity of things. We just don't trust it enough to say you can also retain the old and keep the new.
Right.
And I think that we need to believe our young people. They're capable. They're capable of hearing something old and figuring out how to refashion it so it works in this space or place for them.
Right.
And I'll do just one last thing. We're talking about it in the church context, but if I could just move it into the secular real quick. Some of us know some of the greatest songs of Motown because somebody played it.
Right.
And then you got the audacity being in your 30s, like, that's still my song. You didn't know nothing about Marvin Gaye.
Right.
You know nothing about Frankie Beverly and Mays. You know nothing about these people. And yet, when it comes on at a barbecue, you don't know
you're right.
with your 70-year-old grandmother.
They heard it.
Right? Because you heard it, you were exposed to it.
Right.
We have to trust our young people to expose them, get it in their bloodstream, and then allow them to be creative and liberated enough to create their own. I know, ain't it, Mom? Okay. I felt like you were carrying me. That's good.
Yeah. No, I listen. I had nothing to say. That was good. Yeah. Him and then we'll come to you.
I just had a question. I'm enjoying both of you. Your presentation's awesome. Beyond the sanctuary, meeting the needs of the community, do you see that working out to help people to get in the sanctuary?
So we have had some to come in, but that was not our intent.
That's not the goal.
Our goal was to let the community know that you have a beacon, you have help here. Because oftentimes it's like these commercials you see, we're trying to entice people because we have a motive.
Right.
But we had to let people know, if you never join here,
Speak, sir.
we're gonna meet the needs. And here's the other side of it. I don't want you to stay in the cycle. That's why we intentionally created other paths to help move you forward. I told my staff, and I tell them oftentimes, I'm not, even though our numbers are going, I mean, Lord have mercy, we see people, and it is wrapped up, you can't even drive on our street on Wednesdays. Part of it is like, yes, we meet the needs. The other part is saying, there's a need to help people to move out of the cycle. So how do we impact in a way that we help people to begin to get out of the system. And that means we have to address the system. It's not just me feeding, but now how do I help move to other levels to help make systematic changes? And so that's the purpose of being the Black church, saying, hey, we got to address some of these other issues, systematic issues. Yes, and then I'll go.
I wanted to ask a question about denominationalism in terms of the Black church family. And I heard my sister say inclusion, but I grew up in a very exclusionary.
Which brand of Pentecostal?
Holiness Pentecostal.
Which one though? Which organization?
God,
Okay.
Yeah.
Yes, yes,
Right? So, in terms of bridging this gap of denominationalism, what I grew up in is the AME church, they ain't saved, they don't have no hope. You don't have to go to seminary. I came here Methodist.
Right.
But then when I was in the Methodist, I felt like I had to pledge. AME, like that was the whole fraternal.
Right. Right.
But they loved for me to preach and spit and beat my tambourine there. But don't come up in here looking like Erica by So in terms, and so what I had to do was then find a sacred space in a Presbyterian church.
Wow.
Because I had been suffering from so much Black church hurt.
Wow.
So as Black church, what do we do? Because when we look at the history of it, I believe that in slavery, we were separated from our family.
Right.
How do we dismantle this denominationalism that separates us so? And makes us believe that every other church, every other history, and really go back to our original church, who we are, that we all are the church. Because I tried to even find a home in the Presbyterian church, but see what I did when I started to tell the truth about them, the church, right? Because you talked about your leader and how that history and how he was saying that we are equal. But see, the white churches historically, through theology, they have been the ones who supported through God, through theology, that Black people were inferior. They were the ones who fundraised and were supporting the transatlantic slave trade. So when we start to hold churches accountable, right? Because there is a need for this reconciliation. So how is it that we are able to create these safe spaces? Is it that we dismantle denominationalism? How is it that we can build this gap of reconciliation so that we can create safe and sacred spaces for those who are suffering from church hurt, those 17 to 47? Because I have a 14-year-old, and I don't know if I want her to go to church. I never heard her today.
Right.
How do we heal and really tell the truth about the history? Is it dismantling denominationalism, or that we start really telling the truth about our history?
3 minutes. Oh man. Okay. Time flies. Okay. So for me, and I'm just speaking from my standpoint, it is something that I teach at our church. As a leader, I have to help to tear down those structures that have caused that type of hurt. So even a few Sundays ago, I was preaching and I was just talking about some of the things that Dr. Delgado, that sometimes we put our tradition over transformation. And I love tradition. And like you said, I love hymns. I love anthems. I love all of it. But if you would, and I think about my childhood, if you would have attended my local church and we took the name off, you would have thought we were Pentecostal. Every Sunday somebody was laid out on the floor. White sheet, no. We did all of it because my pastor created an environment to say it's not about the denomination that we're in. It's about serving God, serving others. And so I think if we begin to create the culture and help to tear down some of those things, it will help move forward. But sometimes leaders are stuck in it. And that's why I say I can only speak from my standpoint. Sometimes it's us that's standing in the way. And we have to help to address and teach people it's okay. If we don't do it the same way, Big Mama or whoever did it, it's okay.
I'm a broken record. It's always going to be relationship. Denominations have history. And I'm going to be honest, I like denominations because they keep me employed. That's what I do. I study to show myself.
Oh, Lord. We love the truth. We love the truth.
And so there's that part. The other part is understanding the history of them. We get to the root of the matter when it comes to the particularities of the human experience and the human condition.
Mm-hmm.
There are denominations that were formed, and you probably already know this, because they didn't like how one church did the offering.
Right.
The offering.
Right.
We think we should walk. Y'all want to pass the plate. We are starting a new group.
Right.
Y'all think I'm joking.
It's real. It's real.
They didn't like how testimony service was doing. We're going to break off and start a whole... So what we're talking about is the brokenness of relationship, and you were leaning in on it. And I think it's not about just dismantling these institutional structures that have given folks identity. It is about restoring. What you're trying to get to is actually the thing that we should start with, restoring family.
Yeah.
Valuing the other.
Mm-hmm.
Embracing shared history. Right? And speaking truth to power and truth telling. Like, we broke off from y'all because y'all liked enslavement and we didn't. It wasn't a thing.
Right.
Right? And so I think that when we can get to more of these types of conversations, more of things happening around the kitchen table where we are breaking bread and getting to know one another, then I do think that future pastors who are coming out of seminary or just starting churches fresh off the ground, then we will find ourselves in a position where new leaders will be rising up and saying, I like the tradition, I like how I came through, but it is not enough to be at the expense of relationship with the church across town.
Yes.
You see what I'm saying? And so I think that I'm always going to start there.
Good. Can we just answer the last question? She just got one more. Okay. Please. Yes.
Okay, I was thinking in terms of the leadership in the church. How do you get the leadership to buy into this vision? What kind of activities or what kind of things do you set up for them to do as you prepare them to go out into beyond the sanctuary and do all the work they need to do and make sure it'll be a success and make sure as they do it, they continue to be on a positive strand or thinking positive or moving a positive way. So I was wondering what kind of things you provided for them.
So one of the things that we begin to do is you have to find out what people's motives are, why they feel they are there. Kind of going back to your point, Dr. Delgado, what is your relationship to this church? And we begin to do some training, some teaching to help cultivate this sensitivity that there's a need, and if we're going to be the church, then we're going to have to begin to do these things. And so before we went out there, we kind of intentionally went through some workshop training, some hearing from other people, and inviting people in so that we could begin to hear their story, how they got started. So before we even jumped out there, we made sure that we went through personal training, heard from other organizations, is in my teaching and preaching. And so in every way, we tried to immerse them into that. Okay, we done for real.
Can we give Dr. Delgado and